I will honestly say I don't remember ever speaking a word to Esther the whole time she was there. I think the same basically goes for Jimmie.
For many years, people across America knew Jimmie Walker as a loud, funny, fast-talking son on the popular 1970s television show Good Times. His character, J.J. Evans, was skinny, energetic, and always ready with a joke. His famous catchphrase became something children repeated in school and adults laughed about at home. To the public, he was pure comedy. He looked confident, carefree, and full of joy. But what most people did not see was that behind the laughter, there was tension, misunderstanding, and silence that lasted for decades. Today, at the age of 78, Jimmie Walker has finally spoken more openly about his relationship with his former co-star Esther Rolle, the actress who played his mother on the show. What he says is not loud or dramatic. It is thoughtful, honest, and filled with reflection. It is not a story about hatred, but about difference, pride, and regret. Before he became famous, Jimmie Walker grew up in the South Bronx in New York City during a difficult time. The neighborhood was crowded and poor, and many families struggled every day just to survive. Money was tight in his home as well. His mother worked long hours as a nurse, often carrying most of the responsibility alone. His father was not always present, and that absence created a quiet loneliness in Jimmie's childhood. From a young age, he learned that he had to depend on himself. He became observant. He watched people carefully. He learned how to read moods and situations quickly. These skills later helped him in comedy, but at the time, they were simply tools for survival. He did not grow up dreaming of being a television star. In fact, he first studied electronics and trained to work as a radio engineer. He understood systems and machines before he understood stages and cameras. But comedy slowly entered his life as a way to release pressure and express feelings that he could not easily say out loud. When he began performing stand-up comedy in small clubs in New York, the rooms were not always kind. Audiences could be quiet or harsh if jokes did not land. But those early years shaped him. He learned timing. He learned speed. He learned that energy could win over even the toughest crowd. His style became physical and loud, full of movement and strong reactions. That style would later define his television career. In the early 1970s, television producers noticed him. Soon, he was cast as J.J. Evans on Good Times, a show that focused on a working-class black family living in Chicago public housing. The show was important because it showed a black family trying to live with dignity and strength during hard times. It was not just a comedy. It was also about struggle and survival. For Jimmie Walker, the role felt close to his own life experience. He understood poverty and responsibility. He understood using humor to survive. But what began as a meaningful project would soon grow into something more complicated than anyone expected. When Good Times first aired in 1974, it quickly became more than just another sitcom. The show stood out because it focused on a black working-class family trying to survive in a small apartment in a Chicago housing project. The Evans family faced money problems, job struggles, and social pressure, yet they stayed united. For many viewers, this representation mattered deeply. At a time when television often ignored or misrepresented black families, Good Times offered something different. It showed love, strength, and dignity inside a home that looked real. Esther Rolle, who played Florida Evans, believed strongly in this mission. She felt that the show carried responsibility. It was not only about making people laugh. It was about showing a family that America rarely saw in a serious and respectful way. Jimmie Walker's character, J.J. Evans, was written as a creative and funny teenager who dreamed of becoming an artist. At first, his humor balanced the seriousness of the show. But something unexpected happened. Audiences loved J.J. more than anyone predicted. His fast talking, exaggerated expressions, and explosive energy made people laugh loudly. His catchphrase spread quickly across the country. Suddenly, Jimmie Walker was no longer just part of the cast. He became the breakout star. Magazines featured him. Talk shows invited him. Crowds recognized him on the street. Fame arrived fast and with great force. For a young man who had grown up struggling financially, this success felt exciting and almost unreal. He had worked hard to make people laugh, and now the whole country was laughing with him. However, success also began to change the balance of the show. Writers started giving J.J. more screen time because audiences responded strongly to his character. His jokes became louder, bigger, and sometimes more exaggerated. The serious themes of the show did not disappear, but the spotlight often shifted toward comedy. This shift worried Esther Rolle. She believed that if the show leaned too heavily into humor, it might weaken the message. She feared that J.J.'s character could slowly turn into a caricature instead of a realistic young man. For her, this was not a small creative difference. It was about cultural responsibility. She had fought hard to get roles that showed black women and families with dignity. She did not want the show's purpose to fade under the weight of easy laughs. Jimmie Walker saw the situation differently. Comedy had been his path out of hardship. He believed laughter had power. In his mind, making people laugh did not destroy the message. It helped carry it further. He did not see himself as disrespecting the show's mission. He saw himself as doing his job and responding to the audience. From his point of view, the public decided what worked. If viewers loved J.J., why fight against that? He was young, ambitious, and riding a wave of national attention. Esther Rolle, on the other hand, was older and more focused on long-term impact. She had lived through years when meaningful roles for black actors were rare. To her, this show was bigger than any one character. The tension between them did not explode in dramatic public fights. Instead, it grew quietly. Conversations became careful. Disagreements stayed under the surface. They worked together professionally, but the emotional distance increased. Jimmie later admitted that they were never close. They did not build a warm friendship behind the scenes. What the audience saw on screen, a loving mother and son, did not reflect a strong personal bond in real life. Over time, this silence became heavier. Fame continued, ratings stayed high, and viewers kept laughing. But behind the bright studio lights, two strong personalities held different visions of what good times should be, and neither fully understood the other at the time. As Good Times continued to gain popularity, the pressure behind the scenes quietly increased. The show was successful in ratings and viewers remained loyal, but inside the studio there was a growing feeling that something had shifted. Esther Rolle and fellow cast member John Amos believed the series was slowly moving away from its original purpose. They had signed on to tell the story of a hard-working black family trying to survive with dignity in difficult circumstances. They wanted the focus to remain on real issues like unemployment, education, racism, and family unity. But as J.J.'s popularity grew, the tone of the show leaned more heavily into comedy. For some, that change felt natural. For others, it felt like a loss. The disagreements were not just about screen time. They were about identity and representation. Esther Rolle believed deeply that television had power. She knew that many American households were seeing a black family, like the Evans family, for the first time in this way. She worried that exaggerated humor might make the family look less serious or less realistic. John Amos shared her concern and spoke openly about wanting stronger storylines. Eventually, his criticism led to his departure from the show. His character, James Evans Sr., was written off, and the show continued without him. That moment was painful for many involved. It showed how strong the creative disagreements had become. For Jimmie Walker, the situation felt different. He was not trying to push anyone aside. He was responding to the audience and the producers who encouraged what was working. As a young actor in his 20s, he was also experiencing sudden fame that few people are prepared for. He had gone from small comedy clubs to national recognition in a very short time. Interviews, appearances, and fan attention came constantly. He was being praised for his energy and timing. It is difficult for anyone, especially someone young, to step back and question success when the world is applauding. From his perspective, he was simply doing what he had always done, making people laugh. When Good Times ended in 1979, the bright lights faded quickly. The applause stopped and the set was taken down. But the emotional distance between Jimmie Walker and Esther Rolle remained. They had worked together for years, yet they never fully resolved their differences. They were professional. They showed up. They performed their roles. But they did not build a deep personal connection. After the show ended, they went separate ways. Life moved forward. Jimmie returned to stand-up comedy, touring across the country and continuing to work steadily. He appeared on various television shows as a guest star, reminding audiences of the character that had made him famous. However, there was another challenge waiting for him. The character of J.J. Evans became so strong and so memorable that many people could not see him as anything else. Casting directors often saw him only as the loud teenager with a catchphrase. This typecasting limited new opportunities. While he remained financially stable and active in entertainment, the level of fame he experienced during good times never returned in the same way. For many actors, this stage of life can bring frustration. For Jimmie Walker, it brought reflection. He had achieved massive success early, but it came with tension and unresolved feelings. Meanwhile, Esther Rolle continued her own path. She worked in television and film, always carried herself with seriousness and pride. She remained respected for her dedication to meaningful roles. But time passed quickly. In 1998, she passed away. By then, there had been no public reconciliation between her and Jimmie Walker. There was no dramatic apology or emotional reunion. The silence that had existed during the show remained even after it ended. And sometimes, silence can weigh heavier than open conflict. Years later, as Jimmie grew older, that silence would become something he would finally speak about with honesty and regret. As the years passed and the noise of fame grew quieter, Jimmie Walker entered a different stage of life. He was no longer the young man racing from interview to interview or standing under bright studio lights. He was older, more thoughtful, and more aware of how quickly time moves. The entertainment industry had changed. New faces had replaced old ones. The excitement that once surrounded his name had softened into nostalgia. But with age came something else, clarity. When a person lives long enough, pride often becomes less important than peace. For Jimmie Walker, that peace required honesty to end 2012. He released his memoir, Dynamite, Good Times, Bad Times, Our Times. The title itself showed balance. It was not just about success. It was also about difficulty and misunderstanding. In the book, he spoke calmly about his childhood, his sudden fame, and the way success can isolate a person instead of protecting them. He did not write with anger. He did not attack former co-stars. But he did acknowledge that tension on Good Times had been real. For the first time in a detailed way, he admitted that he and Esther Rolle had never built a friendship. He even said openly that they rarely spoke beyond what was necessary for work. That statement surprised many fans. On screen, they had played a loving mother and son. Off screen, there had been distance as he grew into his late 70s. Jimmie Walker began speaking more directly in interviews. He explained that when he was young, he did not fully understand Esther Rolle's deeper concerns. At that time, he saw the situation through the eyes of a comedian enjoying success. He believed laughter was powerful and helpful. But with age, he started to see the larger picture. Esther had lived through a different era. She had struggled for serious roles that treated black families with respect. To her, Good Times was not just another job. It was a chance to protect something meaningful. When the tone of the show shifted more toward comedy, she feared that opportunity might be lost. Jimmie now says he understands that her strictness and seriousness were not personal attacks against him. They were rooted in her values and experiences. He admits that at the time, pride may have kept both of them from sitting down and having an honest conversation without cameras or pressure. They worked together, but they did not truly listen to each other. That realization carries weight. Esther Rolle passed away in 1998, and the chance for direct reconciliation disappeared. There was no final conversation where they cleared the air. That unfinished chapter has stayed with him. What surprises many people today is that his tone is not defensive. He does not try to rewrite history or blame others. Instead, he speaks about shared responsibility. He recognizes that two people can both believe they are right and still hurt each other through silence and misunderstanding. He credits Esther Rolle with giving Good Times its emotional heart. Without her determination, the show might not have carried the same meaning. At the same time, he accepts that his comedy brought joy to millions. Both things can be true. Now at 78, Jimmie Walker no longer speaks as someone trying to protect his image. He speaks as a man who has lived through success, conflict, isolation, and reflection. The truth he tells is not shocking in a dramatic way. It is quieter than that. It is about regret for conversations never had, respect for a co-star who cared deeply, and the understanding that fame moves fast, but time moves faster. In the end, his honesty is less about exposing secrets and more about finally admitting that silence lasted too long. At this stage in his life, Jimmie Walker is no longer chasing applause. He is no longer trying to protect a character or compete for screen time. Instead, he is looking back at a journey that began in the crowded streets of the South Bronx and rose to national fame almost overnight. When people remember him, they often remember the laughter first. They remember the loud voice, the wide smile, and the famous catchphrase that once echoed across television screens in the 1970s. But behind that memory is a more complicated story. It is a story about how success can bring pride and pressure at the same time, and how creative differences can leave emotional distance long after the cameras stop rolling. The story of his relationship with Esther Rolle is not a simple story of enemies or rivals. It is a story about two people who cared deeply about their work, but saw its purpose in different ways. Esther believed that television had the power to shape how families were seen and understood. She carried the weight of history and representation on her shoulders. Jimmie carried the energy of comedy and the desire to connect with audiences through laughter. Neither of them were wrong. They were simply standing in different places, shaped by different experiences and different fears. When those perspectives met under the pressure of fame, misunderstanding grew. One of the most powerful lessons in the story is how silence can create distance. Jimmie Walker has admitted that they were never close. They did not build a friendship behind the scenes. They did not sit down and speak openly about their differences when there was still time. Work continued. Episodes were filmed, and audiences kept laughing, but the personal space between them remained. After the show ended, life moved forward. Careers changed. Time passed. And when Esther Rolle died in 1998, the opportunity for a final conversation was gone. That absence has stayed with him. It is not loud or dramatic, but it is real. Today, when Jimmie Walker speaks about Esther Rolle, his voice carries respect. He does not speak with anger. He does not try to defend every decision from the past. Instead, he recognizes her strength and her commitment to meaningful storytelling. He understands now that her seriousness came from care, not from control. At the same time, he accepts his own path. Comedy was a tool that helped him survive a difficult childhood and build a career. Laughter opened doors for him that might have otherwise remained closed. Both contributions mattered. The show needed heart, and it also needed humor. In the end, the truth he shares at 78 is not about exposing hidden drama. It is about growth. It is about understanding that time changes how we see the past. When people are young and success arrives quickly, pride can stand in the way of honest conversation. But age often brings humility. It allows a person to admit that things could have been handled differently. It allows regret to be spoken without shame. That is what makes his reflection meaningful. The legacy of Good Times remains strong because it combined seriousness and laughter. It showed struggle, but it also showed resilience. It reflected both Esther Rolle's determination and Jimmie Walker's energy. Together, even with tension, they created something that still matters decades later. And perhaps that is the final lesson of this story. Success may be loud and visible, but meaning is often quiet and understood only later. At 78, Jimmie Walker is no longer just a young comedian with a catchphrase. He is a man who has lived long enough to look back honestly, to honor someone he once disagreed with, and to accept that some truths take a lifetime to fully understand. As people grow older, their understanding of the past often changes. Moments that once felt like victories can later look complicated. Conflict that once felt justified can begin to feel unfinished. For Jimmie Walker, reaching his late 70s brought more than just memories. It brought perspective. When he looks back at his years on Good Times, he does not only see applause and success. He also sees youth, ego, pressure, and misunderstanding. At the time, everything moved fast. Episodes were filmed quickly. Ratings were measured weekly. Fame arrived suddenly. There was little space to pause and reflect. But time, unlike television, moves at its own steady pace. And time allows reflection that youth does not point. One important part of the story is how differently people experience the same event. For audiences, Good Times was a weekly source of entertainment and comfort. Families gathered around the television and laughed together. They saw strength in the Evans family. They saw love between a mother and her children. Many viewers did not know about the disagreements behind the scenes. They only saw the finished product. But inside the studio, actors carried personal beliefs and emotional weight that did not always align. Esther Rolle carried the responsibility of representation. She understood how rare it was to show a black family on national television in a serious and respectful way. She felt protective of that opportunity. Jimmie Walker carried the energy of a young performer finally receiving recognition. He felt proud that his comedy connected with millions. Both experiences were real. Both were shaped by personal history. When Jimmie Walker speaks now, he often mentions that he did not fully understand Esther Rolle's position when he was young. Understanding requires maturity, and maturity takes time. He has explained that when he was in his 20s, he saw the situation mainly as a performer responding to audience reaction. If people laughed, he felt he was doing his job well. He did not think deeply about long-term cultural impact. But Esther, being older and having faced more barriers in her career, saw the bigger picture. She feared that exaggerated humor could reduce serious progress. That difference in focus created tension, even if it was never openly aggressive. Another lesson in the story is how fame can separate people instead of bringing them closer. When one actor becomes a breakout star of a show, it can create imbalance, even unintentionally. Attention shifts. Interviews focus on one face. Producers adjust scripts based on popularity. These changes can slowly create emotional distance between cast members. Jimmie Walker has admitted that he often felt isolated, even while being celebrated. Fame can be lonely. It can make honest conversations harder, especially when pride is involved. Instead of sitting down to clear misunderstandings, people sometimes protect their positions. Now, decades later, he speaks with calm acceptance. He no longer tries to win the argument that once existed. Instead, he acknowledges shared contribution. He credits Esther Rolle for grounding the show and keeping its heart intact. He accepts that his comedy shaped its energy. Together, even with tension, they built something lasting. The fact that people still talk about Good Times proves that both seriousness and humor mattered. In the end, the weight of time has softened sharp edges. What once felt like rivalry now feels like difference. What once felt like conflict now feels like missed opportunity for deeper understanding. At 78, Jimmie Walker's truth is not explosive. It is reflective. It shows that growth is possible even decades after events have passed. And sometimes, the most meaningful truths are not shouted when we are young, but spoken quietly when we are finally ready to listen. When a television show ends, the episodes remain the same, but the way people understand them can change over time. In the 1970s, Good Times was watched mainly as a weekly sitcom. People laughed, felt emotional during serious moments, and then moved on to the next episode. But decades later, the show is studied differently. It is discussed not only as entertainment, but as part of television history. Scholars, critics, and longtime fans now look at it as an important cultural milestone. It showed a black working-class family dealing with real struggles at a time when such stories were rarely given space on major networks. Because of that, both Jimmie Walker and Esther Rolle are now viewed through a wider lens. Esther Rolle is often remembered as someone who stood firmly for dignity and